is a mother of two. She has a 21-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, and she's done a lot of wonderful things in her career. Danielle Dahl is the co-founder of Resilient Stories, a platform dedicated to sharing narratives of triumph, resilience, and personal growth. With over 1,000 articles written for Everyday Power, Medium, and Newsbreak, she is passionate about exploring the intersections of trauma, motivation, and development. Danielle holds a master's in management and leadership, along with a 20-year career of managing roles in various industries, and is pursuing a PhD in psychology from North Central University. Her journey of overcoming childhood trauma and significant loss has shaped her leadership philosophy, which is rooted in authenticity, empathy, and the power of storytelling. Danielle's mission is to inspire others to embrace their inner strength, make value-driven choices, and rise above life's obstacles. As a speaker, Danielle shares her own transformative experiences to empower women to lead with resilience and compassion. Through Resilient Stories, she has built a community that highlights the unyielding strength of the human spirit and fosters personal and professional growth. So, please welcome.
Thank you, guys. Speaking of overcoming challenges, we've had some technical difficulties this morning, but we are going to just roll right through it. So if you guys would bear with me on a few of these, I would appreciate it. Okay, so you were nice enough to tell all about Resilient Stories for me. So I thought I would just show you guys kind of what our platform is and what we do. We help people share their own stories of resiliency. We have inspirational content, motivational content, and once a month we do a healing event around town that is focused on an aspect of mental health and has a craft that accompanies it. So these are just some photos from some of our events. This top left one was a kintsugi event, so we talked about loving your scars and the things, your wounds, the things that make you you, and how you can turn those into beautiful pieces of art, which is the art of kintsugi, and how that relates to kind of healing your own trauma. And then we did terrariums with the little cactus plants. They're very resilient. And we've done talk about luck, and we interlope with some control. So each craft has a mental health aspect that goes with it. Okay, so when I first started writing this presentation, it was a much more traditional, motivational, you can do it type of speech. And then I have an experience that I would like to share. And so if you guys would humor me, I'd like to do what I've been told I do best and tell you a story. So, to quote my favorite character from Golden Girls, picture it, Mexico, January 2025. So I was participating in a healing retreat that Heather McAfee puts on in right off the coast of Puerto Vallarta. And there was an activity that we could go do, which was a temazcal. For those of you who are not familiar with temazcal, it is a kind of spiritual journey in a ceremonial sweat lodge. It physically kind of clears the toxins from your body, has all of these physical health aspects to it, and then there is the mental health aspect of shedding fear, anxiety, and kind of just you have this whole spiritual experience in there. And I thought, okay, I'll go try that. And the one in Mexico is kind of nestled between the jungle and the ocean, right in the Chinalani Resort. And this is an actual photo of that from that day. And I was terrified to go in here, by the way. I don't love small spaces, and I have a close-up of this little door so you guys can see. It's like a 2-foot tunnel you have to crawl through. And I was wearing a swimsuit, so I'm crawling on these little seashells and sand through this 2-foot tunnel to get in there. And it's very small. I don't know if you noticed the shaman standing there, but it's like not taller than he is. And so you have to crawl through this doorway, and before you can go in, there's these ceremonial aspects of throwing tobacco in the fire, and then you have to ask permission from your ancestors before you enter. This whole thing. So we crawl through this hole into this very dark building. The only opening is this tiny doorway and a tiny little like chimney hole on the top that is covered when you go in. So that doesn't ever open. So this is it. This is the only source of light and air. And we crawl in and everybody's kind of sitting around this circle thing here. And the shaman is speaking to us in very limited English, so I don't even know what he's saying we're about to do in here, and I'm just like, why did I think this was a good idea? So he gets going, and they bring in these volcanic rocks, and they sort of stack them in this little hole in the center, and he starts out with, I believe it's 5, and the first element that you start out with is air, and air correlates with the spirit. And so he's explaining all of this again in limited English, some chanting in Spanish. And we were about 15 seconds in, and I was looking for an escape route. And there isn't one, just so you guys know. There's not one. And Heather's husband had told me if it got uncomfortable to just lay down on the sand because it's cooler down there, right? Heat rises, the steam is going up here, and you'd be fine down there. So about 20 seconds in, I'm like, okay, no escape route, I'm hitting the ground. So I'm laying there, and the chanting is happening, the steam is happening, and all of it's going on around me, and I am sobbing at this point. And it was hot, it was suffocating, I couldn't breathe, I was having all of these, I wouldn't call them visions at this point, I was having memories of my childhood. And for those of you who've read some things or know some things, my childhood was traumatic. And this air phase associates with spirit, and I just was feeling like my spirit had been beaten down for a lot of my life. And having all these thoughts and crying, there's chanting, right? And then it ends, and I thought, okay, I didn't die, so that's good. The next phase was the water and mother phase. And this is the phase that, well, one of the two that scared me the most. My mother, here, see her and I don't have very many childhood pictures. These are about the only 2 or 3 that I could find. So when I was little, about 4, her and my father got divorced, and she took my little sister and I to Florida to live by her mother, my grandmother. And my grandma, at the time, decided that my mom couldn't handle 2 children, so she took my little sister, who's about 9 months old at the time, to live with her, and I stayed with my mom. And the thought process there was that I was old enough to tell her if things were not right at my mom's house. I was like about 4 and a half at the time. And I didn't. I didn't ever tell her what it was like in my mom's house. I didn't tell her about the nights my mom would cry herself to sleep, and I would have to comfort her and tell her that it would all be all right. And then after I fell asleep, my mother would go to her job at the strip club, where she would, do drugs and drink so that she could make it through her performances in the night. And then she would get home and crash. And then I would wake up, and school would have already started without me. She would be completely dead to the world, and I started to learn how to make her coffee so that I could bring it to her and try to get her to wake up. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. She was just going to wake up when she woke up. So I learned to start obviously taking care of myself, because it was clear that if I didn't, nobody else would. So the mother phase is happening in this Temazcal hut, and I am thinking of all of these memories that I have and some of the trauma that was caused by my mom, and sobbing, worse than in the air phase, which I didn't really think was possible at that time. And the lady next to me, who was also a participant in the retreat that we were at, sort of just grabs me and is hugging me in this very hot hut. So the 2 of us are sweating, we can't breathe. She's giving me a hug. And it was a moment of maternal care I didn't know I still needed. And it was very nice. I found out later that she let go because she was afraid she was going to smother me. And so she let me go. And then the third phase starts, and it is the earth and father phase. So this one is for your male ancestors, and your father. So again, I don't have very many of these pictures. I have these few. And the one all the way to the right, you're right, yeah, well, when I'm a little bit older, is the last picture that I have of my father and I when I was a child, because shortly after this was taken, we moved to Florida, and he would end up kidnapping my sister and I on a custodial visit and take us across state lines to New York. So when that happens, the FBI is involved with the whole thing. So for a few weeks, they couldn't find us. He was kind of moving us around cousins' houses in New York, and the FBI was looking for us. My grandma was looking for us. My mom was looking for us. Wonderful thing. When they found us, there was obviously court hearings and custody cases that followed. And at one point, he told my mother that he wanted custody of my little sister, but not me because I was too much like my mom. I was too opinionated already, and I hadn't enjoyed my time in New York, is what I gathered. And so he just wanted the baby. So that's all happening in the hunt. But instead of crying at this point, there's a midway through this third phase, I had dug a little hole in the dirt, and I had stuck my nose and my mouth in there just trying to find a clean pocket of air that I could breathe, because now I'm stuffy, right? I've been crying, so not only is it hot, but I'm stuffed up. So I got this little hole, and I'm in there trying to breathe, and there's this moment where something just shifted inside of me, and I sat up, I stopped crying, I looked at the stones in the center, and I thought, all right, if this is how I'm going to go, I'm going to sit up and watch it happen. That's who I am. Up I sat. And before I continue the story, I'd like for you to think of if you've had a moment in your life where that's kind of happened for you, and you've had this extra push of bravery to conquer your fears. So, does anybody want to share a moment like that before I go on here?
Like just
any moment where
making that decision that a divorce is going to happen and I'm going to be okay through it.
Okay, right? Just sit it up and look at it. Anybody else have one of these epiphany moments they want to share?
I don't know. About 20 years ago, I was traveling for work and I received a fortune cookie that said, now's the time to try something new. And within the next week, I quit my job, canceled my wedding, and moved out. So it was a whole thing. But I had to make the realization that if I want to continue to live the life I'm living, nothing's going to change. So I had to make the choice to stand up and try something new, and turn my whole world upside down. And now I love what I do, I love where I'm at, I have greatest friends, and it's all good.
Amazing, amazing. And those messages from the universe come in weird places sometimes. So, sitting up now, I'm looking at the rocks, and I'm like, okay, this is great. This is not as bad as I thought it was in here. Manageable, right? Like, and I had a thought at this moment where I was like, this is a tourist to Mezcal Hut. Like, we're not, away in the woods on a reservation or in some real spiritual place. Like, we're at a resort. So the odds of me actually dying in this hut are probably pretty slim, because I feel like we would have heard about that. So those moments of logic, right? I'm like, oh yeah, okay, great. And then the fourth phase starts, and as each of these phases progresses, the shaman's assistant kind of scurries in more rocks and hands them to the other lady, who puts them in the pile. The shaman sits there the whole time, just ceremonial robes and doing his thing. But the other people are kind of bringing in more rocks. So this last phase, there's a lot of rocks. I lost count. There's a lot of rocks in the pile, and they keep bringing in extra buckets of water. So the first phase started with 1 bucket of water, and then after that, it was 2 full buckets of water we go through. It's just dumping water and creating steam. So the fourth one starts, and the fourth one is your inner child, and it's associated with fire. Now, I had made it through the mother, and I had made it through the father, which were the two that I was really worried about. I wasn't really prepared for the inner child one to hit me the way it did. And I had a moment where I thought, okay, well, that brief stint of bravery was nice, and I am in fact going to die here. but I didn't get back in the dirt, and I was done with that. So I just was still sitting there and was like, okay, we're just going to bring it, and whatever it is, it is. And I had this really magical moment where as I'm staring at the pit, of course it's dark, right? There's no light in here other than what's coming from the flame. So I start to, not flames, hot rocks. So I start to see these sort of green and gold flames kind of just surrounding the hut. And then they turned purple, and then they turned white. And it was just a moment of, I had survived so many things just on the hope that this would get better. And it was going to work in this hut too. And so we end the ceremony. The tarp over the door opens up, and I book it straight to the ocean because I'm drenched in sweat, I'm hot, I'm done, and I jump in the ocean and the waves are crashing, and I think to myself that this whole time I have been trying to therapy and fix the fear that I was not enough for people. I was not enough for people to love, I was not enough for people to take care of, I was not enough for people to want. And in that hut, I had this moment where I realized that wasn't the right fear. The fear was that I was too much. I was too loud, I was too bold, too ambitious, and too bright. And I'll get into a little bit of how those things kind of feel like not enough. It's almost two sides of the same coin. But before we do, I'd like to invite you guys to think what fear is holding you back from your goals, your dreams, and where it comes from. And do you think it's the right one? So, does anybody want to share one of their fears before we move on?
I have a fear. Do you want it? Sure. So, little backstory. 4 years ago, I was put on hospice after a surgery that I had during COVID while I was working in the hospital. And I moved back to Texas to try, just to had 6 months left to live. And I almost forget where I'm going. What was your question again?
What your fear is.
My fear. Okay, so I have to have another surgery. I've had 25. And this next surgery is really just, but I realized after last week, because I had a pretty similar moment last year, I also went to a sweat lodge, that I have to really fight to prove to the universe I want to be here. And the only way that I can be here is to show up every day and to keep going and to face those fears. And so I'm scheduling my surgery so I can get that done. But cross your fingers that we make it.
All right, would anybody else like to share a fear that's held them back in the past or that they think is holding them back now? Okay. So I mentioned when I was little that I had to take care of myself and make sure I survived, and that meant finding food. Now, obviously, this is an AI image because I don't have a picture of this, but when I was about, I wasn't quite 5, I was in kindergarten, I was the youngest in my class with birthday cells, so I was still 4. And my mom wouldn't wake up, and I decided that I would make myself eggs. So I found the eggs, cracked a few of them open, put them in a pan, found a spatula, drug a chair over there, and would make myself eggs. And there was always a mess associated with that, right? Like a 4-year-old isn't going to make a nice, clean kitchen when she cooks herself eggs. So that had been going on for a little while. And my grandma had been checking on us, but she had never seen sort of the evidence of any of these things when she came over. And on one of her visits to check, she comes over, and my mom and the little boy who lived next door were inside the house doing drugs. And she came out to find me, and him and I were standing on the edge of this little river that ran behind the house. and we had found a dead bird. I had never seen anything like this. Again, I was 4.5. And we were fascinated with it. It was literally decaying. It had ants crawling in and out of it. It was gross. I would say he was a little more fascinated with it than I was. But we were poking at it with a stick, and my grandma came out just livid, just mad. And what were we doing by the river? What was I doing standing in the water? Why are we touching this thing? And neither one of us could swim. So not only was this gross and icky and germs and we could get sick, but we could have literally drowned. So she brings us inside, collects all my things, and we leave. She takes me back to my mom's house for a weekend visit, and when she comes to pick me up, she discovers the egg nest. And her and my mom get into a giant fight about the state of my mother's house. And I'm watching this, and I'm sitting there and listening. And at one point, my mom said, "I don't know what you want me to do. Danielle made the mess." And that was the last time we went to my mom's house for a weekend visit or any kind of stay for a long while. Now, when I was 10, my grandma went to Belgium, and she left my sister and I with my mom for a week while she went to Belgium. My mom's life had not improved. She was in a different house at this point, so no river, but there was an above-ground pool. And my sister and I were playing outside, some games, some imaginary girl game we were playing, and the neighbor had a little toddler. He was about 2, and both our moms were once again inside doing drugs, and we were all playing outside. And this little boy scurried up the ladder of the above-ground pool and fell in, hit his head on the ladder on the fall in, and I froze. I thought, what the heck do I do now? I was 10, right? But I had a moment where I froze, and then I ran up the ladder, fished him out, drug him out of the pool, took him inside to get his head looked at by one of the adults. They weren't available, so I put some peroxide on his head, and we called it good. Fun fact, one of my career iterations in this life has been a lifeguard and lifeguard trainer. So I know firsthand how not correct this water rescue was. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't pretty, but it worked, and it was effective. And sometimes that's really all you need to get past that first bout of fear. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be as graceful or as pretty or as spot on as you would like it. If your technology dies and you don't have your notes, it's all okay, as long as it's done and it's effective. So take a minute and think about the moments that have shaped your fears. So I know Davina here talked about her fear of, it's not really fear of dying, it's the fear of almost living, past thinking you were going to die, right? Yeah. So when you guys think about some of those deep fears that you have, is there a moment, is there a story that you think has shaped those for you? And if there is, can I have a couple of volunteers to share? Yeah, do you want this?
My name is Kara. When I was 8 years old, my dad died in a very tragic way. I grew up on a farm. The tractor had what we were talking, and my brother and I were amongst the time. I went through life up until 2 years ago, being afraid of being left in an abrupt, unplanned, scary way, and something that would shape my life for its entirety. That led me to being in a marriage for 14 years with a man who never really knew who I was or cared about me or liked me. He loved me, but didn't like me. And I know, no
the reason why I held on to that man for so long was because I was so afraid of what happens to my dad was going to happen to him somehow. And one day it came to me that that's no way to live. There's absolutely no reason to live in fear like that. Like somebody, when they have the choice to just do it. And not every fear like that is going to be as catastrophic. And that it's okay to live your life for yourself for the first time ever, even if it means giving up your entire identity. So.
Would anybody else like to share? Nobody? Thank you, Karen. All right, so a few more fun things about the moments that shaped my fear, which I, again, for most of the 41 years I've been alive, I thought was not big enough. When we moved in with my grandma, kind of full time, my mom would constantly promise that, we'd come stay there for the weekend, or she would come visit, or whatever her arrival would look like. And I would spend days, hours, I would spend hours on the back of the couch looking out the window for her car. And I wouldn't give up. I'd sit there, and she'd be 3 hours late, and my grandma would be trying to, she's not coming, let's do something else. And I'm like, no, I'm going to wait. She wasn't coming. And then she'd promise to call. The whole day would go by with a phone call. And then her drug use and lifestyle escalated and caught up with her, and so she spent a few stints in jails and prisons. And then she kind of cleaned up her act, and we were going to go and get to live with her and her new husband. And they had picked out a house in St. Pete. Grandma was going to send us to private school. It was this whole thing. We were moving in whatever weekend it was. And the feds raid a outlaw biker gang clubhouse in St. Petersburg, Florida. It was back in the 90s. And my mom and her husband are arrested, and we don't move. We stay with my grandma once again, and my mom leaves to go to prison again. And ultimately, they leave, they get put into the witness protection program and relocated. So at that point, I was still in middle school. It was like the year before high school, so it's summer of 7th grade. And no one's supposed to know where she is. No one's supposed to really talk to her. We get a few phone calls up until the time I graduate, and that's it. That's the extent of that. I'm all set to start college at the University of Southern Florida when my grandma, about 2 weeks before I'm supposed to start, she says, we're going to take a road trip. Okay. Her and I get in a royal argument the day before we leave that involved cornering me in the corner of the hallway and hitting me with a broomstick. And it was so bad that my grandfather, who had never intervened in any of the emotional or physical abuse by my grandma in all of these years that had been going on, physically steps in, takes the broom, tells her to calm down, right? And the next day we're all trapped in a van on a road trip. So it's not comfortable for anyone. I didn't find out until a few days in that the purpose of this trip was to come and visit my mother. She had obviously told her mom where she was, even though she wasn't supposed to. And they thought it would be a brilliant idea to come up and visit her. So we get here, and my mom has all these tales of how wonderful it'd be to stay here and go to Rocky and join the equestrian program, which was my second love. I had two great loves, writing and riding. And they don't have a journalism program at Rocky, but you can stay here and ride horses, and you can be with me, and it'll be wonderful, and we'll have the life I've always wanted. So, in my finite wisdom of 17-year-old, 2 weeks shy of being 18, I say, yes, that's what I'm doing. I'm rebelling against my whole life, and I'm going to stay here and do this. Doesn't go over very well with my grandma. There's a giant dramatic fight in the front yard, drags my sister in the van, they drive away. there's about 6 months of trauma that's not for this talk that we'll kind of gloss over for now, but she ends up dying in a car accident 6 months later after I stayed here. And that leads to me looking at my father, who I hadn't seen since I was little, tiny, who I'd been told my whole life didn't want me, right? But at this point, I had nowhere else to go. So I look him up, take a bus from here to New York, and spend a few months there before ultimately coming back here and then to Hawaii. It's a whole crazy journey. But my grandma at one point when I was a teenager had given me this little card that said, I love you, I love you, I love you, all over it. And when she handed it to me, she said she did it because I always told her I loved her. I was a little kid with some abandonment issues. And she handed me a card so that I wouldn't have to tell her anymore. I would just know she loved me. Now, I know her intentions here were good, but they kind of had the opposite effect. I felt like I was bothering her. I felt like I was annoying her with my love and affection. So, in the middle of Mexico, in a mezcal hut, I realized it wasn't about not being enough, it was being too much for people. My grandpa used to tell me that I talked so much that my tongue was wanting to run away. And of course, it was being funny. And I'd go as a little kid, look in the mirror, stick my tongue out and see if it was trying to talk or trying to run or whatever you would say it was doing. And, you know, it wasn't. But they were older than my grandparents, so they were from the school of children should be seen and not heard. So I was too loud. I talked too much, did too many things. When I was in high school, they had a dual enrollment program, and I wanted to take college English, but I hadn't finished freshman English in high school. And the guidance counselor was like, no, you can't do that. You have to finish this first. And I was like, no, I can. And I fought with her for a little bit, and she let me. I ended up going to that class on Wednesday nights and turning in my paper, and then 15 minutes later, I would leave and go play pool with the boy I had a crush on downstairs. I got a 99. And I thought that she was trying to tell me I wasn't good enough to go do my goal, my dream that I had at the moment. And she might have been. That might have been what she was trying to tell me. But I knew I could do it. I knew that it wasn't that I wasn't enough. I was capable of doing this. And I could. And I kind of always been that way. People were trying to tell me I couldn't do this, I shouldn't do this, I wouldn't want that, right? Whatever it was. But I knew what I wanted. And it was not to live a life that was small. It wasn't to live a life that other people looked at and were like, oh, that's normal. Although I tried that for quite a few years, over 20 years in management and leadership because it was stable and normal and what I went to school for. And leaving to pursue a career in writing, it's crazy, right? That's scary. It's not stable. It doesn't have. I started out as a freelance writer, and it's hard to do those things that you really want to do when they're scary and people don't get them. So fear has a habit of sending you mixed messages, which can make it hard to know what your real fear even is. And so if you spend 30 some odd years trying to combat a fear of not being enough, but that's not the right one, you're going to hold yourself back. You're not going to solve the problem. You're not going to solve what you're trying to solve if you're trying to solve the wrong thing.
I invite you guys to what's happening.
Technology hates me. So I invite you guys to take a moment and just think of what you think your fear is and what messages you might be getting that if any, it could be the flip side of what you think your fear is. For example, many people have a fear of failure, but it's not actually a fear of failure. It's a fear of what happens if you succeed and you have to step into a whole new life, which I discovered in the mezcal hut was what I was really afraid of. Again, tourist hut. I didn't really think I was going to die, but I knew I was going through something that was going to change who stepped out of the hut. Was I ready for that? We find out. So, this is is where we go back to a little bit more of the traditional talk I had planned for you guys. So, two of the best ways that you can overcome the fear that's holding you back is to practice self-love and self-compassion instead of seeking it from others. So, all the time I spent telling people I love them, telling people how important they were to me, and looking for that back from them and not getting it was hurtful. And it definitely built some issues and some fears and things I had to work on. But the best way to do that is to learn to love who you really are. And I've had a lot of help with that from some people we might hear later. But it's really one of the best things you can do for yourself is to learn who you truly are and learn to accept all the parts of you, whether they're a pretty story or not. The second thing is to build your self-confidence by doing something that scares you. So, getting in the hut, not terrifying, but it scared me. I wasn't, ready and eager to just jump in there. Leaving a career to, pick up a keyboard and decide I was going to be a professional writer, scary. I had one of my colleagues look at me and go, writing, Danielle? Really? Yeah. So maybe that's not the first step you take, but do something that scares you. If you're afraid of dancing in public, but you love to dance, maybe start out in a small dance class before joining a dance troupe. If you like to write, but you're afraid to leave your career and just dive headfirst into that, start publishing somewhere. Start submitting some short stories, right? Take a step, one tiny step toward something that scares you. Okay, I don't have notes. I don't remember why I put this here. There I am. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on. There was a point, but I think I got to it already. So, life and our fears often come full circle. The Temazcal Hut started with air and letting go of fear and embracing your inner spirit. And it traveled through the mother and the father and the inner child, which ended up taking me right back to me and the spirit that is me and my human ability to be resilient. And we all have this. And fear is kind of the same way, right? Is it a fear of being not enough? Is it a fear of being too much? Is it a fear of failure? Is it a fear of success? They're all just circular. So, what can you do to help overcome your fears that stem from self-doubt and trauma without it? Let's call that. Here's a few things. The first one was do something every day just for you that has nothing to do with your goal. So a few years ago, when I left my job to be a writer, I wanted to write a book about my life, which I'm still working on. But I was told at a writing group, because I was struggling with coming up with the beginning of the story. Okay. I was struggling with coming up with the beginning of the story. And the advice I got was, if you wrote about something else, the story would come. Okay? So I started walking around the lake thinking I was going to put together a coffee table book of pictures and kind of Danielle's musings around the lake. This almost year-long journey, I didn't make it. I was trying to go every single day for a year. And what I learned on this journey was that when you do something for you that isn't directly correlated to, like, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to walk around the lake, or I want to write a book, so I'm going to write 500 words every day. When you do a different goal that's sort of goal adjacent to what you are trying to do, and you make a promise to do it every day, and you show up, what you're actually doing is rewiring your brain to believe that you matter, to believe that you are important, and just like you would show up to your job or to the other people in your life, you're going to show up for you. So that is incredibly transformative, and I would highly encourage you guys. And that's something you can do today, Temazcal Hut or not. You can commit to doing one thing a day that is just for you, that will help you rediscover who you are. Who you are. Okay, the second thing is to reframe negative self-talk with evidence. While I was practicing for this, I kept having to self-advise myself because I was like, maybe I wasn't ready, maybe I shouldn't have done this yet. And it kind of reminded me when I first left back in 2020 to be a writer. I was having a conversation with someone, and I was worried that I wasn't good enough at this to do it. And I'd already been doing it for almost a year at this point. And she said to me, well, you have a client that you've had for a long time, right? I was like, yeah, I do. And she's like, and you publish things in other places too, and they get comments and receptions and things. And I was like, yeah, they do. And she's like, you get paid, and you're, having enough money to do this full time and not work something else. And I was like, well, yeah. And she's like, so why do you think you're not good? And I said, well, maybe he's just being nice. my freelance client. Maybe he's just keeping me around because he's nice. And she said, people don't pay you to do something because they're just nice. You have to have some skill at what you're doing. And I was like, okay, that's fair. That makes sense. Again, logic will always sort of erode your fear if you let yourself be logical enough to get there. So, what fear, what thing is holding you back that you can reframe with evidence? What have you been doing that you are doing and can do that is in direct conflict with what you're telling yourself you can't? So for me, that was this talk, right? I get up in front of a few less people every month and put on a whole event. And I talk about things just like this. And it's not scary, and we get through it, and it's good, and they keep coming, so, right, there's evidence, they must like it a little. And so, whatever thought your brain is trying to help, because our anxiety is merely the brain's way of trying to keep you safe. It's trying to tell you, oh, that might not work, so don't do it, don't get hurt, and don't, make a fool of yourself, and don't do this. It's trying to protect you, but it keeps you small. If you want to do bigger things, you have to step out and do something new, do something scary. So if you're able to take actual evidence to combat that in some way, then you can help yourself get past your fear. So evidence-based talk, not just negative self-talk. And the third one, do something before you feel ready. So these are just a few things I did before I felt ready. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lead Upstream, but they have a Mind Wellness University where they put together a group of professionals to speak about mental health topics at businesses and places around town. I didn't think I was ready for that, but they did, and I appreciated that. I went on TV for the first time to talk about this, and I'm definitely not ready for that, but I showed up. And then this talk right here, I thought, gosh, I should do some Toastmasters first, or get some qualifications, or take a course, or do something, but I'll apply and I'll see what happens. And here we are. And this talk isn't perfect, didn't go the way I planned, lost all my notes. Okay, I've learned things, and I've ripped the Band-Aid off the fear, so next time it'll be better. And I won't be so scared, because I've done it. So do something before you feel ready. There's self-doubt can only live in the liminal space between when you do something and when it's done. So there's a very small window of self-doubt. Because once you do it, if you go back to reframe it with evidence, you can't tell yourself you can't do it, right? When I apply to speak somewhere again, and I try to go, oh, I can't do that. Well, I did. I could improve it, but I did it. So do something before you feel ready. It has the fear on. Okay, so I'd like everybody to just take a deep breath in and let it out, because I need one. That was a lot. And sometimes the best way to overcome your fear is to just take a breath and breathe through it. Chances are you'll be all right. Yes, breathing is kind of necessary. shared some parts of your story today, which I appreciate. And if you are looking at diving a little more into your story and your fears and how that's affected you or what you can do with it from here, I'd just like to talk for a minute about the retreat that we are having. It's our very first retreat, and it's going to be a combination of our monthly events that we do. We'll be doing 2 of them over this weekend, and then some storytelling sessions. And one of those sessions is going to be rewriting your story from the perspective of someone else in your story, who I don't want to call them the villain, but maybe you thought they were the villain. I have a sample story of this, so if you guys want to hear it. But it's a great way to shift your perspective and kind of find a new mindset in how the events that happen to you may have looked a little differently just kind of outside of yourself. So that's one of our storytelling sessions, and we'll have several of those. So this is Beautiful Sometimes Pictures from Where We'll be in Island Park, Idaho. Before, does anybody have any questions or would like to share a part of their story? Pam? Rena?
So, no, it's just a logistical question. What was the 5th phase of your calling that?
We only have 4.
Oh.
I heard traditionally there's 5,
Oh.
but again, tourist time. So I was incredibly thankful that there were only 4. Yeah. So. Anyone else have a question or would like to share something? Because we're a little early. So.
They probably tried touching the ground because our short.
No, I wish, but I was told before we went in there that there just is no way out. And I asked Heather's husband here, what happened if I just got up and left? And they were like, no. So I doubt it. But anybody else have a question or a story? Yeah.
What were you expecting before you went to the hut?
Not that. Not that. So I had some guidance before we went in the hut about what that would be like. So I knew there were 4 phases. I knew they correlated with elements. I knew they kind of went back to like the ancestors, the mother, father, right? I knew all of that going in. I knew it was going to be small. I knew it was going to be hot. I was prepared for all those things, but I wasn't prepared for what the actual experience would feel like, and I just don't think you can be until you do so. Like I had all of the facts, had all the information, but it was definitely more of a spiritual journey than I anticipated.
Hi, my name's Madonna, and I just want to say I commend you for going into such a ceremony. We're Native American ourselves, and so we're familiar with the ceremonies. Something that you had mentioned was that you had feared through the ceremony, and you mentioned you weren't on reservation land or ceremonial land, so you weren't going to die. Just want to correct you there. Just to let you know, our reservation, we're very inclusive with our Native American lands, and we welcome you to come celebrate our culture with us. And so we always invite people to Crow Fairs. So I want to make sure that no one fears the reservation, and that we adopt people in. And I'm really glad that you even experienced that, just so you can respect that and mention it in your life story.
Thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate the correction. Oh gosh, thank you. Sometimes when you don't have notes. All right. Anybody else have a question or a story they would like to share? So I actually have. There's 6 of us total. My dad had 4 children afterwards with his new wife, and all of us sisters actually live here now. So there's 4 girls and 2 boys. Yes, we're in contact. We're all here. We're not as close lately as we have been in the past, but we're all here, and we all are trying to just live life. Some of us are doing a little differently than others.
Can you speak more on the feeling of being too
had a huge crush on this kid for years. He knew I was not secret about it. But he didn't reciprocate those feelings. But one day I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to write him this really detailed love letter note thing. And I'm going to go down here by the library where we would meet before one of our classes, and I'm going to kiss him and give him this note and run away. Again, a little much, right? Like not the usual way to go. And so I start to follow through with this plan. I write this giant note, I meet him at the library, and I chicken out on the kissing part. And instead of handing him the letter, I decide to open it up and read it to him. So here I am at like 16, there's this boy, I'm reading this very poetic, lyrically, Jane Austen-esque, like, novella. And he's looking at me like, what the? And I read it all, threw it at him, and ran away. Years later, he would actually marry my best friend. And we talked about this at one point. He said, you should have just kissed me and handed me the note. And I was like, no. And so for me, my life has kind of always been a series of stories just like that, right? Like, I could show up and just do this, but I don't. I show up and do this. And then there's sometimes some fallout or something doesn't go the way I planned, right? And then I pull back because I go, oh God, if I just had tried to play here instead of playing here, I wouldn't have failed. And it wouldn't feel quite like this, So, yeah. Does that answer some of your questions? All right. And I think that we are about out of time. So, thank you guys. Thanks for sharing.